Once upon a time, in the heart of a small Jamaican community, lived a young boy named Jimmy. He had a peculiar habit of eating everything in sight, including his family's food and even other people's food if they weren't looking. Despite being caught numerous times, he always managed to act innocent, leaving others dumbfounded and furious. This behavior kept him in non-stop trouble as he tried to balance his insatiable appetite with the need to avoid getting caught. Since his mother had left for a new country and his father was never in the picture, Jimmy lived with his grandmother. Grandma, despite her strictness, had a soft heart for her grandson and loved to please him. She cooked for him daily, trying to satisfy his appetite, but she would also get angry when she caught him stealing food from elsewhere. The boy's hunger was endless, leading to a constant battle between him, his stomach, and his grandmother's patience. At a family reunion during a holiday, while the adults were engaged in conversation and the aroma of the food filled the house, Jimmy's appetite could not be ignored. He sneakingly made his way into the kitchen where the food was being prepared and began sneaking bites of whatever he could get his hands on, stealing food from his grandmother's sight. As he munched on the stolen food, he tried to mask the sounds of his eating with fake cough or by distracting those nearby. His sneaky habits had become second nature to him, and he was determined to get his fix without getting caught. As everyone gathered around the table, ready to eat, they realized something was amiss. Bowls that were once filled with delectable treats were half empty. The adults, catching on to what had happened, exchanged glances and whispered conversations as their suspicion began to rise. Jimmy, acting innocent, tried to blend into the background, but a few adults in the room were growing increasingly suspicious. He attempted to look as nonchalant as possible, avoiding eye contact, but deep down, he knew he was under scrutiny. His attempts to act innocent didn't fool everyone. A few of the adults exchanged knowing glances, their eyes narrowing as they observed his behavior. They couldn't help but think back to the past incidents of missing food, and they had their suspicions that the culprit was none other than Jimmy. "Jimmy, are you eat out the food? Everybody know you're craving like dog, you know," a family member said, their annoyance coming through clearly. Jimmy looked around, trying to act innocent as he replied, "Me no eat out nothing. Honest. Jimmy, you lied to my face now," his grandmother said, her tone both disappointed and upset. "You never eat nothing." Jimmy maintained his innocent facade and denied the accusations, saying, "No mama, me no eat no food. Me no touch nothing in the kitchen, me swear." His grandmother, who knew him too well, gave him a sharp look, her eyes narrowing. "Me know you lied to me, you know, but it's alright." Despite his protest, she was unconvinced by his denials. One day, his grandmother prepared a plate of food for him to carry to one of the members of her church who was at home sick. She was going out herself and asked him to make the delivery. She carefully packed the food into a small container, making sure it was still warm. She handed the plate to Jimmy and told him who it was for and where to deliver it. Jimmy nodded, accepting the food. "All right, Mama," he replied, taking it from her, his gaze focused on the food inside. He held it carefully, trying to resist the urge to sneak a bite or two, even though he knew this food wasn't meant for him. The aroma of the steaming food wafted past his nostrils, and for a moment, his desire to taste it swelled within him, but he knew he had a task to do and couldn't indulge. He took a moment to steady himself, his stomach growling slightly, reminding him of his constant hunger, but he knew he couldn't give in to it this time. He had been given a responsibility, and besides, his grandmother was counting on him. Halfway through the journey, he stopped and looked around. "Mama, now I don't know if I eat a little bit of this, you know," he said to himself. Plus, Miss Mabel sick. She don't need so much food, he continued. Inside, Jimmy was still fighting his urges. His appetite got the best of him. Slowly at first, he started taking bites, rationalizing that it wouldn't be missed. However, he couldn't resist the temptation, and before long, the plate of food was nearly empty, with only a few vegetables remaining. As he finished the last bite of the meat, Jimmy began talking to himself, the guilt starting to creep in. He felt a mix of satisfaction and shame as he acknowledged that he had indeed eaten the food meant for Miss Mabel. Jaja, I want me do now, man, he said to himself. Mama must pop my clot. Can't believe me eat off the sick woman food. When Jimmy entered Miss Mabel's house, he quickly handed her the plate of food, trying to act as if nothing was wrong. However, Miss Mabel noticed something seemed off. She examined the plate, her eyebrows furrowed. Jimmy, why the plate so empty? She asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. She looked at the plate, which was now devoid of the meat that should have been in it. Jimmy's heart sank as she observed the empty plate, knowing he couldn't hide his act of gluttony. Mama said the food not enough today, but she just wants to send us something anyways, he said. Jimmy, nervously realizing he had been caught, quickly tried to come up with an excuse to leave right away. His words barely convinced her. Miss Mabel, being wiser, was skeptical of his explanation, her gaze fixed upon Jimmy, searching for any signs of guilt or deception. She examined the remnants of the food on the plate and then glanced at Jimmy. Me have to go back home now. Mama wait for me, he said, feeling the weight of her suspicion. Knew he couldn't stay longer. The guilt was eating away at him, and he couldn't bear to be under her scrutiny any longer. Miss Mabel gave him a nod, her suspicions still lingering, but she didn't want to push the matter further. She thanked him for bringing the food and watched him hurry out of her house. Jimmy, relieved to be away from Miss Mabel's inquisitive stare, made his way home quickly, still consumed by guilt and the fear of getting caught by his grandmother. A few weeks later, Jimmy's grandmother had baked a pudding and left it to cool before going out to run errands. Jimmy, being home alone, was left without his grandmother's watchful eye. He surveyed the dessert, its scent filling the room, and his mouth watered with anticipation. I wonder if we can cut a little piece of this, he muttered to himself. As Jimmy gaped at the pudding, his sweet tooth took over, and thoughts of taking a little piece flashed through his mind. No one was around, and the temptation was too strong for him to resist. His stomach growled as usual, and he justified it to himself that a small slice wouldn't hurt. After all, his grandmother wouldn't make a big fuss over one small slice. Unbeknownst to Jimmy, his grandmother had forgotten something at home and decided to return. As he was cutting the small piece of pudding, his grandmother walked in. Jimmy heard the door opening and quickly realized he was in trouble. In a panicked rush, he shoved the hot pudding into his mouth, trying to hide his misdeed. His grandmother walked into the kitchen, puzzled to see him there, standing in front of an empty plate. She raised an eyebrow, her suspicion immediately piqued. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Jimmy, his mouth still full of hot pudding, couldn't respond verbally. He shrugged, trying to act innocent, his face a bit flushed from guilt, but also from the burning sensation of the hot pudding in his mouth as he tried to quickly swallow it. "Open your mouth," his grandmother said, sensing that he was up to no good. Tears streamed down Jimmy's face as the hot pudding was scalding his mouth. His grandmother saw the tears and the uncomfortable expression on his face, and her concern rose. She waited for him to open his mouth and show her what was inside. "Open your mouth, me say!" she shouted in a harsh tone, her arms crossed. He couldn't swallow it, and the discomfort was unbearable. He had no choice but to spit it out. Have mercy upon me, Father God, she cried. Jimmy, she said. What make you so licky? She asked. His grandmother had reached her limit. She sighed heavily, shaking her head in frustration. You know, see, I'm be at that pudding there for church? You didn't ask me permission, Jimmy? Me sorry, Grandma. You're sorry, Jimmy? You have to change your ways. Change your nasty, greedy ways, she said. She had observed his actions, witnessing his act of gluttony and the repercussions he had to face. Her patience and concern for his behavior had worn thin, and she knew she had to address the issue. It was summer, and Jimmy's grandmother needed a much-needed break. She decided it would be a good opportunity for him to spend time with other relatives in the country, hoping it would provide a peaceful and calming environment for all involved. She made arrangements for him to stay with a family who lived in a peaceful countryside community where he could play, help with little chores, and perhaps learn a thing or two about self-control. The plan was for him to spend a few weeks giving his grandmother a chance to have some respite while Jimmy hopefully gained some insight to managing his behavior. She sent him off with a reminder to behave and respect his relatives' home. Meanwhile, she intended to enjoy the silence and peace within her home for a change. Jimmy, being the disobedient child he was, didn't want to go. He kicked up a fuss about being away from home for so long. He resented the idea of being sent away. Despite his reluctance and disobedience, his grandmother insisted that he must go, understanding the importance of a break for both herself and him. A few days into his stay with his relatives, they started to realize that their food supply was dwindling at an alarming rate. Food that was meant to last for the week was disappearing quickly, and no one could explain the missing meals. It couldn't be just the rats, they thought, as the amount of missing food was too significant for just vermin to be responsible. The family started to whisper amongst themselves, wondering about the disappearing food and who could possibly be behind it. A few of the cousins suspected Jimmy, having witnessed his habits of eating beyond his fill back home. However, they knew better than to accuse without proper evidence, so they kept their suspicions to themselves, keeping an eye on the food and Jimmy. They noticed the correlation. The food started disappearing after he arrived. The disappearance of food wasn't an issue that had been previously, only after he was there. One of Jimmy's cousins, Alex, having caught him gorging himself with food, blurted out the suspicion they all knew was growing in their minds. "Me know Jimmy nyam out the food, you know," Alex said. Another cousin nodded, agreeing with Alex as they whispered the assumption. "Me see how him greedy for food back home. Now we have to go start lack with the food or else me go just make all of we starve." Another one chimed in, sharing their suspicions without hesitations, their words still hushed as they spoke. The conversation continued, the cousins speaking in whispers, but their words clearly expressed their assumption that Jimmy was the culprit. Growing tired of their food supply being eaten up, Alex decided to put an end to it. He got a few slices of bread and spread honey on it, but mixed something else on it. As he spread the honey on the bread, he secretly added a laxative. This ingredient would cause the consumption of the bait to result in a bowel movement, hopefully revealing who or what was responsible for eating their food. He placed the sliced bread with the concealed honey bait in the kitchen area, making sure it was visible but casually mixed with other snacks as if it was a regular snack among the others. With the bread doctored and set out as bait, he decided to take a step back and observe who, if anyone, took or showed interest in the trap set for them. Jimmy, roaming in the kitchen, spotted the bread and honey set up on the table. His eyes fixated on it, his stomach growled, and his mouth watered. He couldn't resist the temptation that the honey bread posed, and his hand extended, grabbing it up. He didn't think twice about what it might be laced with. He brought it to his mouth and took a bite, savoring the sweetness of the honey and the taste of the bread. Alex, having left the baked bread behind and discreetly kept an eye on it, later discovered that it had disappeared. He remained watchful, paying attention to who was around and any signs of discomfort or distress, waiting to see whose system the laxative would react to. Meanwhile, Jimmy, still unaware of the added ingredient to the bread, went on about his way, his mind occupied with other antics. Little did he know the consequences he'd endure as the time passed. Alex remained vigilant, keeping a close watch on everyone, especially those who were at home when the bait had been left out. He carefully observed each person for signs of discomfort or any odd behaviors that might indicate the effects of the laxative. As Jimmy spoke with Alex, his stomach groaned uncomfortably, a direct effect of the powerful laxative coursing through his system. He tried to ignore it, but the feeling persisted, and he shifted slightly, trying to mask his discomfort. Unbeknownst to him, Alex watched him shift and noticed his discomfort, a small smirk curling at the corners of his lips, knowing exactly what was happening. He knew the effects of the laxative in Jimmy's system and silently enjoyed the payback. He continued talking to him, seemingly unaware of his internal struggles while privately grinning inwardly. Jimmy, not knowing that his cousin was aware of the predicament he was in, tried to maintain his composure as best as he could. He continued talking, his words stilted, trying to keep his focus. It was clear that something was making him uncomfortable, but he was struggling to hide it, not wanting to reveal the cause to Alex. There was an inner turmoil as he fought to ignore the effects of the laxative, and the conversation felt forced, his replies becoming shorter and more hesitant. Unable to contain it anymore, Jimmy dashed off, his hands pressed firmly against his behind as he sought some privacy. There was no hiding his obvious discomfort at that moment, and he rushed to find a bathroom or some secluded spot to relieve himself. His face was flushed with embarrassment and discomfort. His steps hurried as he sought a place to release the effect of the laxative, feeling a sense of urgency. As soon as Jimmy bolted out of the bathroom, his cousins burst into laughter. Seeing the outcome of Alex's plan and the swift reaction from the laxative's effect, they couldn't contain their amusement. They exchanged looks and tried to suppress their laughter while watching him rush past again for another round. "Alex, that wicked man is a wicked thing you do to him. Look how you make the youth run up and down like wild ass," one of them said. "Me can't breathe. Me never see a man run so fast in my life," another one chimed in. Jimmy was in for a sleepless night, the effects of the laxative keeping him up all night, running to the bathroom and returning to bed, only to repeat the cycle. He barely got any sleep, the constant need to relieve himself taking away any restfulness he could have had. The discomfort grew with every passing hour, his attempts at sleep thwarted by his own body's reaction to the laxative. The pain in his stomach and the frequent bathroom trips kept him up, tossing and turning in bed, with no rest in sight. The next morning, he awoke exhausted, drained and in pain, the consequences of his actions painfully apparent. Feeling the discomfort and understanding the repercussions, Jimmy apologized to his cousins for taking their food and vowed never to repeat his greedy behavior again. He realized the depths of his actions and felt genuine remorse for his behavior, promising to change his ways and respect others' belongings. He knew his actions had consequences, and he was determined to learn from this experience. Hey everyone, thank you so much for coming back to our channel. I hope you had a great laugh while listening to this funny and amazing Jamaican tales. As we always say in Jamaica, no trouble one, no trouble you. See you in the next one. Be blessed.